Thank you for that introduction, PJ. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I am Nicole. I am from Treaty One territory or Winnipeg originally, and I'm of Francophone and Icelandic background. And I usually like to start with that so people understand where I'm situating myself in this context of colonization and the very messy, multi-layered situation that it is. Oops. So this is the title of my most recent work I did in my final year of my master's at Desautels, Iceland. I called it New Iceland, Our Home on Stolen Land, and I talked specifically about the New Iceland settlement and a lot of the intricacies in the history that wasn't really or hasn't really been discussed previously. And I was particularly interested in how the story is that the Icelanders arrived, it was difficult, they left hardship, and it was a story of endurance. And it often leaves out the other aspects and other players, so to speak, that came into the situation. So this is the old map that was Canada, and you'll notice that the red square is the postage stamp. So Manitoba was the postage stamp province. It wasn't as big as it is today, and this was particularly the area and surrounding areas where the Icelanders had settled, as previously said in other presentations. And so I have also a museum background as well. I worked at the Manitoba Museum for about 6 years, so I have a curatorial and program development type background. And so I use that when I make my work. I typically don't make one piece of art and give it a title and then have another piece of work. Like I see each piece of work as a collective coming together to create one big piece, almost like a museum setup. And then I try to challenge that very colonial setup of how museums display history and the perspective that they typically take. This was part of a table that I made, and I placed some of the names some of the names you might recognize are Icelandic names. So this was particularly the area where the Icelanders settled near Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba. Here's a bigger picture of the exhibition. I had a 3 meter long paper that I had help getting translated. It was from a book called Nya Iceland in Canada. And it was a book written by Sigtryggur Jónasson, and John Taylor contributed to it as well. And his parts were translated into Icelandic, and that was one of the books that was sent back to Canada to entice the Icelanders to come here. And so I had some of what was written in the original Icelandic and then the English following. And I used ash and scattered that around because part of why they left, like a small part of it, was Mount Hekla had erupted. So similar to when Eyjafjallajökull erupted in about 2010, 2011, there was a lot of ash that was like thrown about, when Eyjafjallajökull erupted, there was a lot of difficulty with flight patterns, and there was ash all over people's homes, and it was like a whole ordeal. So that was one of the reasons, not the main one, but one of many reasons that the Icelanders thought, oh, we need to do something different, and also financial. They were given money from the Canadian government, about $13.43, which today would be just over $400 to make the journey. And they started off in Quebec, and then they had to make their own way through Quebec to what is Manitoba. And I have chess pieces that I made out of wax. I made the mold myself, and I poured into them and changed the color. And then I have a booklet there that I had made, and that's John Taylor. It says Nilenduskit Sedi, which means colonial asshole. Because he was one of the individuals that was given a role from the government he was called the Icelandic agent, and he was responsible for helping and assisting the Icelanders in coming over to Canada. But one of the things that Ryan Aford, who's been mentioned a lot, mentions in his book and also in another article is the duality of this person, who was from British Barbados. That's where he was born. And then he went to Texas, and somewhere along the line, he became a convicted slave trader because slavery was outlawed at that time. And he thought, well, I want to get rid of these workers, and they happen to be of color. And so he said, I don't know, what do I do? And so he sold them, and the people were like, what the heck? Like, we're free individuals, like what's happening here, and the government was like, no. So he tried to like overturn that conviction and like expunge his record, which some reason got missed by the Canadian government, who then promoted him to Icelandic agent, where he helped the Icelanders because his daughter saw that they were struggling in when they were in Ontario and convinced him to help the Icelanders because you must help them. They're so helpless. Look at them. So that's like one part of the complex history. Little bit cut off, but this is some of what was written in the Nya Islandi Canada. So it was basically talking about how America was already mostly settled and that Canada's this new country and how great it is. And, there's this big plot of land that they can have. And, we're giving them money to come and the land is free. Don't worry about it. We just want you to farm it, cultivate it, do what you do in Iceland. It's totally fine. And the Icelanders saw this as an opportunity to escape what they were experiencing, which was that they weren't really able to own land. It was very difficult, and they were indebted to the farmer where they lived. So a lot of the time they had to ask the farmer's permission if they wanted to move, and in some cases, if they wanted to marry, who they wanted to marry, and it's really messy. So this kind of discusses, what they were told in this book and the propaganda that it was, which was, oh, Canada's milder than Iceland. It's not that cold. It's you're going to do well here. And specifically the area around Lake Winnipeg's quite rocky.
Milder than Iceland.
Yeah, and it's like quite difficult to cultivate that area. And so they're like, oh, farming's gonna be easy. It's gonna be fine. You got this. And then when they arrive, they're like, oh, we have to figure out the vegetation. We don't have any animals. What are we gonna do? And then there was a report that because immigration at the time was through the Department of Agriculture. And so Mr. Taylor wrote to the Department of Agriculture about how great the Icelanders are doing, everything's fine. And, how the trip is and going through Quebec and everything. And yeah, they were given plots of land to the Dominion Lands Act. And it was about 160 acres of land, very square parcel of land. And one of the things that I mentioned is the land was not freely given, it was taken and it was misrepresented in the sense that the idea was the Icelanders thought, oh, this land was freely given to us, which it wasn't, it was taken. There are indigenous people that already lived there and they effectively displaced them. And just kind of push them out because just like in Ryan Afert's book where he mentions the white settler colony, the idea was that the Icelanders would come create a settlement, and John Taylor even created hierarchies amongst the Icelanders. So those that didn't speak English were the lower part of the hierarchy, those that did speak English were in the middle, with the ultimate goal of making the British subjects as per the John A. Macdonald's idea of making this white British nation. And so, yeah, this is John Taylor. That's what he looks like. And as I mentioned before, all in bold there. And yeah, in the eyes of the community, they saw him as a leader, and that's where the duality comes in. They saw him as someone who was a man of faith, a man of like kindness, and just wanted the utmost, like, he just thought of them, the Icelanders felt he thought of them quite highly and just wanted them to succeed. But then you have this like convicted slave trader background. So it's like, how can you be both this like altruistic guy, but also have this really dark, messed up background? And so this is a close-up of my work. I made the board out of like particle board and I like cut it out myself in the shape of Manitoba. I use art as a way to get the message across because I feel like that's a medium that's not often explored enough. And I feel that it's just a way to get people, I don't want to say in the door, but just get them familiar with the material in a different way that might possibly more palatable for them instead of just reading it in a book or seeing it in a traditional museum. This might help more. Of course, you have my personal angle on it, but they can, make their own interpretation. And I want them to ask questions and to wonder, like, why did she draw on his face? Why did she write that down? What does all this mean? And etc. And I also just find it quite interesting that there's like just a lot of, I think, I don't want to say lack of knowledge, but there is a lack of acknowledgement of what truly went on. And I feel there's some revisionist history there where, again, they just think about the Icelanders arrived, they met this man named John Ramsay at some point, and things were grand. It's like, well, there was some difficulty there at some point. The Icelanders just arrived and pushed them out of their land. And there's one story, I don't know if it was in Ryan Avert's book or a different book that I had read, where the Icelanders arrived on a ship and there were indigenous people fishing near the shoreline. And as they were coming in, the bow of their ship ripped the nets of their fishing nets.
Hmm.
And so the indigenous people looked up and were like angrily shouting, like, what, like essentially, like, what have you done? And the Icelanders like, I don't think we're very welcome here. Well, I mean, and so then that created some awkward tensions. They eventually kind of got mended, but again, I feel that saying that eventually they got along is not a valid comment, because again, it sort of just glosses over this very messy, complex history with lots of layers to it. Oh yeah, and here's like another angle of the same exhibition with the ash. And you can see that it says, when settlers arrive in New Iceland, they have the opportunity to choose land there, land that hasn't been previously chosen, and they get about 220 days wages and 160 acres of land. And so yeah, this is the exhibition. And the people at the exhibition, so you can see that they're reading the poster that I've made, and kind of there's a lot of discussion happening. And I felt like this was a good way to get people in the door and get them kind of thinking about these topics. So this was my mind map. I thought I'd put it in there. When I was working on my master's thesis at Desautels, I had a lot of ideas and like rough drafts and things, and just sort of how do I approach this, because it's a constant learning process. And there's obviously going to be mistakes made and wrong steps made along the way. So I thought, how should I get started? And I kind of highlighted the main points I wanted to focus on. And as PJ mentioned, I tend to use objects as performers, and that can be sort of a weird way of looking at, like, what exactly does that mean? I can show you in the next slide, but I basically take objects that we recognize and that we are familiar with, and I change the material and the position, and does that change the relationship you have with that object and how you view it? So, for example, I took a crown, which is very much a symbol of power, dominance, and control, and I changed it so that it was made out of plastic or silicone, and one I melted and made out of tin. And then when I placed it in certain settings, like whether it's on the floor, if someone's wearing it, do you view it differently if someone's wearing it versus if it's on the floor or on a chair? So this was my solo exhibition. The title comes from Anthony Hope's novel from 1898 called Prisoner of Zenda. And he uses the term Ruritania to refer to this kingdom. That's basically, it's been used in academia and in political circles to sort of mean this utopian, almost idealized way of looking at the world, and it could symbolize a town in Central Europe, basically. And I took that and I tried to flip it on its head and change the way we looked at that term. And here's like the poster, and that would be the leaflet that I made for the show, and just like some poems on the sides. But yeah, I played a lot with symbolism, and I made, it's not real, that's fake blood, but you wouldn't know it because it looks pretty gruesome. So I used cornstarch, flour, and a bit of water and some food dye to create that coloring, and I put it throughout the gallery. And actually, before the gallery opened, the window was broken, and I thought that was a great opportunity to use the window and incorporate it somehow. So I put one of my billy clubs there, and the eggs, I did that myself. So I didn't break the window. I will take credit if it makes it sound better. but I did egg the window.
Mm.
And so it just
Sounds
kind of has
good.
this weird, like it's got this tension to it, because how would a silicone baton break a window? Is that even possible? So I'm playing up with those power structures and that struggle.
Very creative.
And then I also had a video in the installation, just like me playing the drums, but if you didn't know it was me, it's me. But you don't see a head or anything, so I'm just drumming, and there's like a constant sound of this intense drumming, almost like in war when the soldiers is drumming to guide the troops. So I'm making a commentary on that and like the rigidity and everything that is royal. And the chair, I just thought it was kind of kitsch, you could say. It looks like it's from someone's living room, but it has this sort of royal upper class vibe that I think was also common in like I want to say like 50s, 60s, when people were trying to elevate their status in the world. And yeah, this is a better shot of the handprints and the baton in the back, if you can see it there. And the streaks are because like I said, egged the windows. And then that's another shot. And I also played around with the idea of chess and how chess is very much a game of like strategy and a game of talking about dominion and kingdoms and queendoms. And the floor pattern in the gallery, it's called Rimt. It's in an area of, well, just outside Reykjavik. It's called Breitholt. And this is a gallery. It used to be a bakery back in the day. I don't know why they have tiling like that, but it was a challenge. And I went with it to create this chess-like pattern. And then people walked around the objects. So in a way, they're forced to confront that tension of like, we're inserting ourselves in a place of power. We're the power, we're the authority over these objects. So similar to like colonization, I'm making you uncomfortable and sitting with that discomfort. So you really challenge what it is that you're experiencing. This is made out of ceramics, and it didn't fire properly, but I still like how it turned out, so I used it anyway. They fired it too high of a temperature, so the color kind of got faded and looks a little clumpy, but I kind of like it. And then, yeah, I put some flake blood everywhere and tomatoes because of the protest food. It's their handheld, so tomatoes and eggs made sense to me as it ties into all of this. And then, as it relates to New Iceland, it comes back, like, I feel like it all really circles back to that idea of like, it's the royal family, the crown. Those terms are often used a lot: crown land, crown prosecutor. Like there is a strong connection to the royal family, even if we don't think it's still there, because a lot of the treaties are signed with the crown. And I know people say, oh, it's easy. Why don't we just get rid of the monarchy? Let's get rid of it. But then what does that do to the treaties? Does it make them invalid now? Like how does that work? So we need like, it's very complicated. So I think that's my time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. And of course, if anyone has any questions or any comments they'd like to offer, we're eager to hear them.
Yeah, any thoughts, queries, outrage?
What kind of reaction did you get from people in Iceland?
It was a mixed reaction. They didn't realize that we are still a dominion, that we're not a republic. So that shocked them. And they find it interesting that even though there's this misconception that it's a symbol, that the crown is like, it's on our money, and oh, it's just a constitutional monarchy, it doesn't mean anything. When I kind of break it down more, they're shocked that there's like a lot more of a power imbalance there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anyone else have it? Yes, please.
I just find all the different materials that you use to mold these different objects really interesting. We just talked a little bit about that process, and also about the different materials and how they act in that space, the wax and the other things.
Sure, yeah, so I guess the the materials in the space, it was interesting because there was a really hot day and I had some of the wax kind of near the window when I was just setting up and they were getting quite soft, so I had to move them. So that was something I had thought of where try and keep it out of direct sunlight or light because it won't, because well, it's wax. I was like, it won't melt. But the process for making the wax, I basically just found beeswax candles and I had whittled them. And then I, melted them down in a pot and the mold making process was the trickier part. I would say not the making of the wax, but I used silicone and I had to use like both parts. I think it's like the base and the catalyst, mix them together, and then put it around the object that I want to make the mold of. And I had to wait for a few hours and I made it quite thick. So I actually had to cut object out and then hold the two pieces together so they were like a perfect sandwich. And then I would pour the wax in hot when it was ready. But I had to have a pot within the pot where the wax would go. Because if I just put it directly in the pot, it would get with the water and get really kind of messy. So I had to do it separate. And the tin was the harder one because I had, for safety, I always had someone supervise what I was doing because it could go either way. And that one I just melted with like a crucible or like a metal bowl of sorts, and I put the tin in there. And tin, actually, I wouldn't recommend it, but you can technically melt it at home on your stove because it only takes like 200 Celsius, maybe a slight more. That's very toxic, so don't do that. But I melted it in the metal shop and then I poured it into the silicone mold that I had made as well. And I had to put it in sand because the first time it just kind of went everywhere because the mold didn't hold very well. And as far as how they reacted in the space, I found it interesting when I was placing it around. I was almost like playing chess, figuring, okay, should I put them here or here? How do they just like in the solo show, like how is it like a game of chess? Like where should I put all the pieces and what does each piece kind of represent? And are people able to get close to the objects? I found in terms of the wax figures, it was maybe more successful in the group show where I had the actual chess pieces. I can go back. There, I found it was quite successful there because I made 125 chess pieces out of wax. That took some time. Anyway, I hope that kind of answers the question. I feel like I rambled.
Where was the exhibit?
It was in Iceland, in Reykjavik.
Pardon me?
It was in Iceland.
Oh.
Yeah.
We're both in Iceland.
It was in Reykjavik.
Pardon me?
In
In
Reykjavik.
Reykjavik.
We're both in Reykjavik.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the one you said was in Breitholt.
Oh, technically,
right?
yeah, that was
Yeah.
what I thought, yes.
And then this show was, where was it held?
This was in Desautels, so the Living Art Museum.
Yeah, downtown.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
In the
downtown.
Marshall
in-
House, yeah.
Yeah, in 101, right, or
Yeah.
just outside of, yeah, vested right. in- yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It just seems to me that you've given us a little bit of insight into all the thinking that you were doing in terms of getting ready to tell this very difficult story. And it certainly fits with today's efforts in a whole different way, which is something I can appreciate.
Mhm, mhm.
Oh, thank you.
And, yeah,
There is the saying that art should comfort the disturbed. So I
Yeah.
don't put it once and disturb the comfortable. Is that something that informs your work at all in some direction, some form?
I mean, I'm not really sure. I just think that like my goal as an artist is more how I position myself as an ally is more what I'm interested in and the activism part of it. And this was the first time I've physically removed myself from the work. I'm usually performing in videos or doing some kind of live performance. And so I was kind of experimenting with how to take myself out of that. And I guess if anything, I felt a bit of discomfort. So I'm like, will the work be strong enough to speak for itself? So I guess in a way, kind of informs my practice.
Brynjar.
You find that there's difference in reactions between your sort of more performative arts and the more visual kind of museum style arts?
I would say the reactions, I think it depends, like. This one, both times I carefully curate how I want it to go, like I'm always thinking of the execution of the work, obviously can't plan for everything, but I try and think of, okay, if I were to show it if I were to do my performance as a video and show it, let's say in this room, like what's the lighting like? Where are the people sitting? Are they able to walk around? Like how are they interacting with it? What's like the space like? So I'm always thinking of those things. So I guess in terms of like how interactive it is, maybe the museum aspect, they're able to get closer. And some of them even touch the objects, which I didn't plan for that, but I also am like, if you touch it, you touch it, like, that's okay.
Oscar.
The presentation, it seems like the work is very, very much designed for a particular audience of Icelanders and kind of, bringing them face to face with the history that they might know very well. I'm just curious, how would this work travel? How would it be, would it transform if you exhibit it here versus if you exhibited in Toronto or, I don't know, is it a transforming work of one to the receiving?
I mean, I might change some of the objects I put in it, or maybe the way I display it, but I think a lot of what is said in the exhibition can travel. I know that most of the history is within Manitoba and Iceland. There's a strong connection there with about, was it 200,000 Icelanders live in the Manitoba area? I remember in my trip up north to Hufsus, they were saying that there's also like new Iceland settlements. And I didn't know this prior to the museum meeting, like going to this museum, but about 33 Icelanders went to Brazil and made a settlement there. So I guess in that way, I think if I were to go there, I think they would understand it. Toronto, I think there is still a strong enough connection to Winnipeg. I think they'd understand, but maybe they'd be a bit more removed from it as there's not many Icelanders there. But I think at least from a historical standpoint and from like how the world is currently with some of the conflicts, I could see this being very poignant right now, I guess.
All right, well, we're just right at the end of the test, so I think I will say thank you very much. Nicole, for your presentation.
Different than what I expected. Well, about history.
All right. And now we'll move on to our final presentation.